Hello everyone, this is Kris Keys and I want to show you how to use water brushes for watercolor or ink paintings. So I have these brushes that are from a brand called Arteza. For the past two videos I have painted flowers using Arteza's watercolor paper, and then I did a review on their gouache paints. So I want to show you their water brushes. They come in a pack of 6 and they have different tips. So they have 3 fine tips and 3 broad tips. I used to use water brushes a lot, especially when I would go and like paint on the go or at a fashion show. I would use water brushes because they don't make a mess. You just put water in the bottom of the brushes, as you can see, and then there's like a little pressure button that you press under the brush bristles, and that releases the water. And so it's like you don't have to bring a cup or a glass of water. There's very little cleanup. It's just like the water brushes, your watercolor paper, whatever you're painting on, and that's it. Alright, so I have these peonies. I bought a bunch of peonies the other day, and I think that I just bought a bad bunch because they haven't bloomed yet. They are still pretty tight. So I just sort of started to peel them off, or peel them and open them up, and you know, they, of course, they look like this. They don't look that fresh, but we're going to paint it just like this, and we will see what we come up with. I always feel like it's nice to paint fresh flowers, but also flowers that are decaying and dying, just to get different textures, different versions, and sometimes the latter looks a lot better. Alright, so I'm using the thickest brush tip for these water brushes to wet the paper. I'm using a wet to wet technique, and I am just wetting it sporadically in areas. I'm sort of following the shape of this open flower. I'm using the second dual brush tip, not dual brush, but the second flat brush tip, and I'm dipping it in Liquitex ink and also mixing it together with a little bit of white ink, because the Liquitex ink that I'm using is magenta, so it's pretty pigmented and dark, and I want this to be like a very soft light, almost a pastel pink. So you can see that the water is going down really nicely. The watercolor paper that I'm using is Arches watercolor paper, and I'm using the back of it, so it has some texture but not a lot. And so far I like these brushes. They are synthetic fibers, and you know, the fibers are pretty smooth, so you don't get a lot of brush strokes on the paper unless you're using it sort of like on a dry sheet of paper and you don't have that much water on the brush. But as you can see, it's coming out pretty nice. So I'm taking one of the fine tips. I have dipped it into the magenta color and also in red, and I'm just going to lightly outline some of the flower petals so it can have that really like crisp, decayed sort of edge to it. We don't want the flower to look too new or too like it's a fully blossomed fresh bloom. We do want it to look like it's sort of worn out a little bit, but it's still going to be nice. Alright, so I'm just spreading this ink out, and I won't be using any other brushes for this tutorial, only the water brushes. I'm just going to use all of them so I can see, you know, what functions they serve as far as like the length and the width of the brush bristles. Alright, so the flower petals, the base of the flower petals are pretty much finished. I'm going to add some more darkness to it after I do the stem. So I've added water for the stem using the same brush. I've taken the same brush, the second brush that I used for the flower petals, and I've dipped it into a brown iridescent color by Dr. P.H. Martin's, the ink, and I've mixed it together with Dalla & Rowney's light green pearlescent ink. This is an acrylic ink. So far what I like about the brush, of course, like I said, is very little cleanup. You know, it's not too much of a mess, and it's just pretty like quick and straight to the point, especially if I'm on the go. The thing that I don't like is that you don't get those brush strokes that you would get like with a calligraphy brush that I usually use. But you know, it's the function, it serves its purpose. And also one thing that I'm liking about drawing the stem, as you can see, I'm getting some really fine line strokes. So if you want to do like line drawings, even with on the wet to wet technique for line drawings, you can absolutely do that really easily with the fine tip brushes. You can get really detailed brush strokes. Okay, so I'm going to do another flower, and this is another one of my peonies, my dead peonies that I bought. And the shape of this one is sort of like a asymmetrical shape, so it's like a heavy density of flowers on one side, and then the other side the flower petals have started to really dry up. So I'm going to paint that using the same brushes. I'm wetting it. I know you can't see the wet areas, but I've wetted the paper just in the shape of that flower, and I'm going to go a little bit lighter with this one. So I've just added more white to my pink inks, and like I said, I'm using white Dr. P.H. Martin's ink, but if you have white gouache or white watercolor, whatever that you have that'll lighten up that pink, that will work. And another thing that I've seen people do, I've never done it myself, but you can add, like if you say if you're painting, like I used to paint on airplanes, that was just like a way to relax. I would paint on airplanes, and if you don't want to bring like a palette of watercolors or a palette of inks or whatever, you can just add your inks inside of the brush area where I put the water. So you just mix those inks together in a few of the brushes, and in the other brushes you have water, and then you don't have to bring any paints at all. And if you are a person that like to do like carry-ons like me, then you can just pop that into your clear TSA bag or whatever, and you can paint on the plane. Alright, so for this green that I'm doing for the stem, this is a green color, also by Dr. P.H. Martin's from their Bombay line, and I mixed it together with a tiny bit of black ink, just so it can be just a little bit darker. Alright, so that's pretty much it. If you have any flowers that you want to paint from life, I always say that it's great to paint from life versus from 2D if you can. And if they're dying, don't worry about it. Try to paint flowers that are both fresh flowers and flowers that aren't so fresh, just so you can get different shapes. I think that this is more interesting and more unique than a fresh peony. So I'm doing the same thing I did for the first flower, adding some red edges, and I'm going to blend that out with a brush with no ink on it, with just water. And I'm also liking that these brushes are holding the water. It's like it's only releasing the water when I'm prompting it to. It's not like I've had water brushes that just keep like the water is getting in between the bristles too much, and it's almost just like it's leaking, and it's making a mess on the painting. But with these, it seems like it's keeping the water pretty stable until I press the little button to release it. So I like that as well. Alright, so the last thing I'm doing is adding in some brown ink around the base of the paint, around the base of the flower, close to the leaves and the stem. And then I'm going to add some white paint just to give it a little more negative space. And this is a part of a painting, a fashion illustration that I always do, is just add some white paint to it. And I always say that you can use white watercolor paint, white gouache paint, white whiteout. I love white gel pens, white calligraphy pens, whatever. So this is Arteza's gouache paint that I'm going to use. And I know out of the gouache paints that I received from them, this is the one that will go the quickest, because I've run out of out of my Horadam gouache paint that I also love. Alright, so I'm taking the finest tip brush that they have, and I am just adding in a few white strokes. Not a lot, just very, very delicate brush strokes on the leaves and on the flower. Alright guys, so that's the peony painting, a dry peony painting, but it looks alive to me. And if you are interested in getting these brushes, these water brushes from Arteza, I will have a link in the description box below where you can receive 10% off. And let me know if you've ever tried any of Arteza's materials, like their watercolor paints, watercolor paper. They have a lot of things on their website, so I will leave a link to their website as well. I want you guys to have a great and productive week, a week full of trying new things, especially new techniques with watercolors. If you're interested in learning more about flower paintings and how to be more confident when using inks and watercolors as it comes to flower paintings, I will leave a link to my online course. All right, I will see you guys in the next video. Have a great week. Ciao.